A few days before Halloween, I actually had a few days off, so after finishing work, I was hoping to stay up late and enjoy the night. I bought fast food on the way home and ate it on the couch while watching Netflix. About 30 minutes into the show, I paused and got up to throw away the unfinished food. I went into the kitchen and threw it away, but when I turned around, I saw someone standing in my backyard. They were just looking at my house without really doing anything. For context, my backyard is small but surrounded by a fence, so it's not possible for them to just stumble while taking a shortcut or something. I turned on the backyard porch light and opened the door. "Hey, what are you doing?" I yelled at them. With the porch light now on, I could see their face. They were still young, maybe in their early 20s, but their eyes looked very tired, and for lack of a better word, creepy. They didn't respond, so I called out again. "You need to leave, this is my property." The person looked at me, and then casually started walking towards the gate. I made sure they left by looking out the front window and watching them walk down the street. After they left, I just took a moment to think about what happened. It was very strange. Why would they even stand in my backyard to begin with? They were just staring at my house for no apparent reason. I even went as far as going out into the backyard and standing in the same spot as them to see what they could see, but there was actually nothing. I went back inside and tried to forget about it. I didn't know what to do. I poured myself a drink and sat back down to watch the show I was watching. I finished that episode and had just started the next one, so maybe it had been 20 minutes when I heard some soft footsteps running in my backyard, followed by a loud bang on my house. I stood up and ran to the kitchen to see the same person now standing at my back door. They were pushing their body against it and trying to forcefully open it. I grabbed the handle in case somehow they managed to get past the lock, but seeing the anger in their eyes up close was terrifying. I backed away and grabbed my phone while calling the police while standing in the kitchen and watching this person continue to try to get in. But then they suddenly stopped. They stared at me through the glass door, breathing heavily and still with a wild look in their eyes. Then they walked back to the gate, but this time they didn't leave. They stayed on the side of the house like they were hiding. I kept pacing back and forth from all the windows, waiting for the police to come, and hoping the person wouldn't try anything again. 5 minutes passed without any sound or movement before the police car arrived right on time. I heard footsteps running from the side of the house, but not away from the house. They ran back to the door trying to open it again. They chose to try to get in again, rather than take their chances running. Of course, the police managed to catch them when they tried to get in, and after a brief struggle, they handcuffed them and put them in the car. When questioned, it was very clear that the person was under the influence of something strong, and this was later confirmed with some tests. Although questioned that night and in the following days when they were sober, the man didn't give a real reason for his actions. I'm not sure how to feel about it. Part of me sees it as just a crazy person who has no reason, so why worry about it? But then part of me thinks about their gaze, and the fact that they tried to get in rather than run away means they must have had a reason. And somehow if they had managed to get in, what they would have tried to do to me is likely just as terrifying, reason or not. As far as I know, they were only jailed for a few weeks for being unconscious during their actions, so I can only worry if they intend to come back. This happened last fall, as we approached the end of the season nearing winter, and where I live, the weather can get very cold, sometimes even snowing in October. I've been doing food deliveries for the past 3 years and was working that night. It was around 1 in the morning and snow was lightly falling outside. It was one of the first snows, so people might be a bit hesitant to go out. I was one of the few cars out and about, but orders kept coming in almost immediately after I finished one order. After cruising around for almost until 1 a.m., I picked up one last order. The snow started to fall heavier and I began to feel a bit tired. I went through McDonald's where they ordered food and picked up the food, then set my direction towards the house. The place was nearby, about 10 minutes away, but I didn't consider the direction before accepting the order. It was opposite to my place and I was already far, about 25 minutes from home, so it would be a long trip back. Irritated with myself, I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road. The snowplow truck still hadn't come out, maybe because they didn't expect as much snow. But my SUV usually handles well in the snow, so I wasn't too worried while driving. As I drove, I realized the road I was taking would lead me out of the main town area. I checked the map again, and indeed it said that was the route. But it was just a very unusual route. I didn't even know there were houses there because the only reason people take that road is to get to the highway leading out of the state. I drove for a few minutes, only seeing streetlights and trees until I reached the turnoff. It was a single narrow road branching off from the main road. I slowed down, becoming more cautious as this road was smaller and lined with trees, so it would be a very scary night if I slipped. As I drove down, I saw a few long driveways leading to a faint light amidst the trees far before I reached the driveway I was supposed to take. It looked like the others. I slowly drove past the driveway until I reached the house. The house was medium-sized and old, completely covered in snow. There was nothing particularly striking about it. The only intriguing thing was that the house was in the middle of the woods. I parked in front and grabbed the bag, then began to walk towards the door. The snow was thicker than I'd like, soaking my shoes and even the bottom of my pants. When I reached the porch, I knocked and began to put the bag down, but almost instantly the door opened. I looked up, seeing a big man in a winter jacket. His face was pale as if he had just been outside in the cold. "Hey, I have your order here," I said, lifting the bag. After a moment, the man stepped back and opened the door wider. "You can just leave it there," he said, raising his hand and pointing towards what I assumed was the kitchen. The way he said it made me feel like I should, but I knew it was a bad idea to go in there. I looked at the man's hand, seeing he wasn't holding anything, so it really didn't make sense for me to do anything other than give him the bag. "Sorry, but I really have to go," I said nervously while lifting the bag again. The man's face turned into a frown, then suddenly he slammed the door shut. Still holding the bag and slightly startled by what happened, I placed it on the porch and quickly began to walk back to my car. But as I passed the front yard, I heard something from behind me. I turned, realizing the sound was coming from somewhere else on the side of the house. It could have been the back door or something, but it was too faint to be heard clearly. Starting to feel uncomfortable, I walked faster and got into my car. I started the engine, and just as I looked up, I saw the man walking around the side of his house and quickly walking towards my car. He was holding something in his hand, almost looking like a rope, but there was something I couldn't see clearly. Suddenly, I felt my heartbeat spike and adrenaline take over my body. I started reversing, trying my best to go fast, while also not getting stuck in the snow. The man approached, maybe only a few feet from my car before my car gripped the road and began to gain speed. I backed out of the entire driveway, seeing the man finally stop and watch slowly fade into the darkness as I reversed onto the road. I didn't know what he was doing. Honestly, the whole thing was so scary and confusing that I didn't want to think about it. I still do food deliveries, but I'm much more cautious, and most of the time, I don't even knock on the door anymore. I just leave the food on the porch and go. If I had stayed any longer that night or gone inside the house, who knows what would have happened to me. This happened a few years ago in early October. I got a 2-week break from work and went to a cabin in the mountains outside my city. It was an Airbnb far from the hustle and bustle, which was perfect because I wanted to spend a few days camping as well. I drove for 2 hours to the cabin and arrived there in the late afternoon. The place was very nice and secluded. No other cabins or buildings in sight, just the surrounding forest. I unpacked my stuff inside and explored the rooms. But there was nothing special. The cabin felt very cozy with a classic old-timey vibe. Not something I particularly liked, but it was a nice change for a holiday environment. The rest of the night and the next few days passed without anything noteworthy. I spent my time relaxing outside in the cool autumn weather for most of the day, and spent the nights inside the house sitting by the fireplace. However, on the 5th day, I decided to go camping with my camping gear. I wasn't sure how long I would be camping, but planned for 2 to 3 nights. There were some trails nearby that I knew from previous planning, but only one of them actually connected to the cabin. To keep things simple, I chose to only take that trail so I could leave the cabin directly without having to drive anywhere. I walked for at least 3 or 4 hours before finding a spot I liked. It was the only open spot I found besides the trail itself. But there was something unsettling about camping right on the trail. It was getting close to nighttime, so I set up my tent and made a fire. As it got darker, I put on a thick sweater and jacket because the air was starting to get very cold. I sat outside by the fire for about an hour, eating fast food and waiting for sleepiness to kick in. However, at some point while I was sitting there, my eyes caught something. A figure walking out of the woods. I saw them walking in the darkness without a flashlight or anything, and disappearing into the distance. The only light in the woods was my campfire besides the dim moonlight, so whoever was out there must have seen me. It was so strange the way they walked, just out there in the woods without any light and not even following the trail. It made me feel very uncomfortable, enough to consider going back to the cabin, but I knew it wasn't safe to go out so late at night. I remained vigilant for half an hour, checking everywhere but not seeing any other signs of the person. After a while, I started to feel sleepy, so I flattened the fire and let it die out. But as the fire's glow faded into ashes, I heard footsteps coming from the left side of the campsite. My eyes widened as I looked towards the woods and tried to force my eyes to adjust to the darkness, but all I could see were a few feet in front. The footsteps grew louder as they approached the campsite, getting closer to me until I thought they must be out of my sight. But then they walked a little to the side, still in the darkness and passing by, then continued walking away. They never stopped or did anything to indicate they were aware of my presence, but the possibility of them being out there in the same spot as me was too unlikely to be a coincidence. After the footsteps disappeared, I grabbed my flashlight and packed up my tent, gathered my belongings, and went back to the trail. It wasn't an ideal choice, but I could sense that there was something strange about whatever was happening. I walked quickly, keeping my flashlight on the trail and trying to stay calm. The forest was so quiet, only adding to the eerie situation I was experiencing. Though hesitant, I managed to make it back to the cabin. It was still late at night, and after walking so far that day without sleep, I immediately fell asleep on the couch just minutes after getting inside. My mind was so foggy that I didn't even really think about the person in the woods anymore. Being within a 4-hour walking distance from where I saw them, I didn't feel like I had a reason to be afraid anymore. However, as I drifted into sleep, I woke up to a strange sound. Something on the side of the cabin like wood being slid against the wall. My eyes widened, and I turned my head towards the back of the room, seeing the window slowly being opened by a man outside. His eyes immediately shifted towards me as I stood up. Then he closed the window and fled. As I rushed towards where he was already far into the woods. I gathered everything and left the cabin, driving to a hotel in the nearest town. Clearly, I didn't know who the man was or what he was doing there. Clearly, he was following me and trying to get into the cabin while I slept. If he had succeeded, there's no telling what would have happened.